Well, Dr. Sam Amadi, Director, Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, joins us in the studio to look at the controversies the election timetable released by INEC is generating. Glad to have you join me in the studio here this evening.
Thank you. I'm glad for having me.
First off, INEC's timetable is out, but they are still using the 2022 Electoral Act. If I'm wrong, you correct me, because the amended one is yet to be harmonized. Do you envisage any issues here?
Well, there are going to be issues, but I guess INEC could have the capacity to perhaps manage them, mitigate what is becoming like, some will argue, set up to fail. The 2023 election is actually witnessing a lot of crisis and uncertainties. First, INEC has to plot its timeline straight from the Constitution, the window within which you must conclude the election, conclude everything, and people get sworn because there's a timing out for those incumbents, at least even if they win election, for new inauguration, whether the executive or the legislative arm of government. So INEC has to get it done. And with INEC's recent timeline, INEC has perhaps about 10 or so days to play with, a gap. So between when it becomes red, okay? Yeah. So what INEC is doing is a right thing to plot on the status quo law. And again, many will argue, we don't know what comes out of the legislative pipeline.
We're going to get there.
Yeah, it could be anything. So INEC rightly plots what they have to do, but then hopes that no significant variation in the timelines. I mean, if you look at the timeline for the House on campaigns, shut it down, expand it, but it looks like INEC will be okay with the timeline if nothing happens. But not just timeline. Take, for example, primaries, whether we are hearing something like direct primary and consensus. So if you rule out indirect, it has implication for the rules INEC will craft in terms of regulations or guidelines. Again, it has implication for how the parties themselves look at their constitution and maybe do some amendments and then calibrate procedure for elective convention. So all this, everything builds on this unknown, what comes out of tomorrow's or next tomorrow's.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. The House of Reps is calling for an emergency plenary to discuss a timetable. There's talk of the 360 days, yeah. So apparently that's going to be affected.
Well, it depends on how they also, what the House probably will do is that the INEC has issued a timetable, okay? So they're going to look at it. They also want to look at what is in their own law, because they have passed their own law, even though there are some conversations about perhaps wanting to vary some things, we don't know. At this stage of conference...
You're talking about transmission?
They passed their own law. The House had passed a version.
Yeah.
But they also
House, yes.
Yeah, they also talk about some concern about House, maybe they vary a couple of, but at the level of conference, it don't vary, either this or that. So it's two versions that must choose between one or, but in this legislative session, we've seen a lot of, abuse of procedure. So I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow we hear a difference. But again, the House will look at it, and maybe they also want to address their mind to what this means in terms of the work they are done and they are doing with the Electoral Act. So they're going to use INEC's tentative timeline to say, what do we need to change or fix? Again, the House is also a lobby group. The legislature becomes a lobby group during the election. If you watch what happened in 2023 election, they kind of advocate, they look at how it favors them, how it affects their own chances of return, and maybe they would think, I would be surprised if tomorrow, Tuesday, they go into executive session and talk to themselves in privacy and see what does this mean for us. And then maybe they will make some legislative intervention to address whatever they consider. First, public interest, is there a crisis we're envisaging? Two, on private interest, how does the timeline work for us? And what do we need to perhaps change or tweak, or do they invite the INEC chairman to explain more, and so on and so forth. But what Nigerians and INEC, everybody wants is, there's so many uncertainties. Take, for example, electronic transmission, right? The Supreme Court, threw a spanner in the work when it heard that, this is not obligatory because of couple of things. INEC's own mistake, not gazetting it, and the procedure, and the court's own misdirection in terms of jurisprudence. Okay, but then it's still a crisis now. So if, for example, any reason you don't institute in the Electoral Act, in black letter law, say clearly you have to do this, then what becomes of INEC's rules, and how will INEC react to that? So a lot of uncertainties. Some of them judicially caused, some of them caused by what the National Assembly is doing. Ultimately, there's weakening trust in the election. Already after 2023, we saw 26% voted out of registered voter. In runoff elections, it keep getting up to 18%. Runoff in Edo, or the last one we did, even Anambra, was very terrible. So you're going to damage public trust a lot if people's expectation on the Electoral Act, fails, and ultimately, which is bad. Some people are beginning to look at the 2023 election as already running into very serious legitimacy issues.
All right. Meanwhile, while we discuss all this, of course, Senate is also trying to hold an emergency meeting the same day. The former Vice President, Atiku Abubakar, is calling for a review of the timetable's dates because, according to him, the case may coincide with Ramadan. Is that tenable?
First, this adds to the layers of pressure on INEC and also, pushing INEC to walk a tightrope. INEC is already on a tightrope. I'm not even too convinced of INEC's capacity, clarity in-house in terms of the administrative rules and procedures and institutional setup to really deal with election fairly. In fact, if the previous INEC that worked clearly, worked a longer period, failed and failed woefully, this current INEC, in my view, maybe even has less technical efficiency to deal with things clearly, more efficiently. And so burdening them with this unnecessary advocacy for changing the schedule is bad. Again, let history help us. Mahmoud, who just left, conducted elections during Ramadan. It's true that the Bishop Conference once, talked about, put out the same demand, but it didn't avail. Look at all the Islamic countries with, almost 90% Muslim population. They conduct election during Ramadan. And again, you see, we know that Ramadan is holy season, but it looks like from history, people go to work, offices don't close down because of Ramadan, things that are conceivably more arduous than voting. I mean, whether you're a blue-collar worker or a blue worker like many of us, it's difficult to go to work every day and fast. And people do it and come back home and break their fast normally and get the benefit of the spiritual exercise. So footballers who actually play football during Ramadan also play football. So to just walk to the next corner and vote and come back home during Ramadan shouldn't be a problem. And the danger is, if the pressure builds and INEC concedes, maybe to make for peace, okay, it creates a precedent that there will be so many exceptionalisms. So people, Jehovah's Witnesses have had issues going to court, some years asking for waiver from Saturday, which is when for national duties like election, they have reported cases, and the court said no. And the U.S. Supreme Court's principle works here. Secular policies can only be impeached if they impose benefits, extraordinary benefits or harm. So the benefit-harm theory says if a policy does not in any way specially constrain a sector of religion, Christian, Muslim, whatever it is, or confer advantage in a tangible, exceptional way, then that is secular purpose. So this schedule does not in any way harm Muslim faithful, because interestingly, February used to be both Muslim and Christians. Some of the Christian sects are doing 30 days, some are doing 100 days. Lent. Even the Catholic, even the Pentecostals, some of them proclaim 100 days, 50 days fast. So Nigeria is a fasting country, and they have learned the rigor and the, if you like, the capability to both work and fast. So I think that the INEC shouldn't grant that request, because it's going to be a slippery slope. anybody can cop out and say, this, that. And already INEC is dealing with a lot. So, one, it's not a serious issue. Two, we've done it in the past, not too distant, where elections have held on Ramadan period, not on the Salah day. This is a period of 30 days of fast. And that 30 days, we do a lot of things. We go to work, we do many things, hold meetings. Even politicians will be campaigning. I mean, if Ramadan came earlier than election period, they will be campaigning. And so I don't see anything. And we're also asking for making elections more civil. People, it doesn't have to be to work. People need to move from their home, go and vote, and come back and rest. So
instead of putting security all over the place, army and all
absolutely,
that,
and making it like this makes it look like a great work. It's like this big burden.
And then the question of diaspora voting, the question of people who have special services, maybe like us, like
voting,
the army
maybe
voting
at different places.
Now let's talk about that, because we've talked about INEC, we've talked about the NAS, but there is a very important sector, and that is the citizens. In the last elections, you had 93 million registered voters. Only 25, that's about a quarter, voted. That's terribly, terribly abysmal. What is causing it? Is INEC part of the problem? How can we turn that around? Because it speaks volume about, what do you call it? The people who get elected, were they really...
Become a minority, a micro of a minority of a minority.
Minority, yeah.
Okay, first, to know how much big a problem this is, contrast with Ghana. The last election, Ghana had about more than 60% voter turnout. So out of registered voters, about 60%, a sizable majority, voted for whoever emerged, compared with Nigeria, 2025, okay? Now, if you go back and ask, and I'm surprised because before that election, the momentum, the campaign was heavy, the obedience, the everything. So in spite of that, campaign was more intense, people participated more in campaigns, but at the voting time, they draw back. Three things at play here. One is confidence. In spite of all the campaigns, people still lack confidence in the integrity. And that integrity is explained by the fact that people want votes to count and the counted votes to reflect in declaration of result. And that's where this electronic transmission
count votes and votes counted must count.
Two different things. So the first, you want their vote to be counted equally, 1-1. You want what has been counted to reflect in the declaration. And that's what the problem is. So we've seen that after fair counting, mutilations and all that, so people lose confidence. And that's what the electronic transmission is geared to cure. So people have a confidence that, look, that vote I saw on the platform,
it's the same.
It's the same they're using to declare. If you don't create that integrity, that's the spectrum of integrity, you're not going to cure this voter apathy. The second thing happening is the violence, the sense in which threat. Now, look at local government elections coming, and you are hearing somebody says, only the person who supports my candidate will emerge. The FCT minister today said something like, the only person who get it is the person supporting Tinubu. Citizens look at language, and that language sounds like, oh, it's a fait accompli. What are we going here for? So people, the level of campaign going on in FCT is good. I mean, you would expect people come out. I heard some people tell me, somebody told me that they're not going to vote because when they vote in their traders, they'll come and demolish their shop. So there is a threat, there's a sense in which citizens see voting as no longer a choice, real choice. They are constrained. And people opt out. Look at what happened in Lagos in the governorship election. There's no question around inquiry, what truly happened. I have to write to the IG of police asking them. They did nothing. Citizens came out to vote. And no state actors working with state actors beat them up. In fact, my cousins called and said they were gunshot. And the people went back. And you're talking about voter apathy. So Nigerians have internalized two very dangerous narratives. First, votes don't count. Two, they wouldn't even allow you to vote. So I won't be shocked if in the next 27 election, we're talking about 15%. That would be perhaps the lowest in Africa. So the point is, we need to do messaging. Come and vote. That makes sense. Go and register and vote. That makes sense. But ultimately, people are not fools. They are reading the lips of teachers, looking at the environment, and
I was
having a
discussing
sense that
with Dr.
maybe it's not safe to vote.
I was discussing with Dr. Chibuzo Okereke, and Chibuzo Okereke said that there's another issue too. The Nigerians are not getting involved in the politics of the nation. That they're saying it's them. But until Nigerians begin to get involved, they keep on seeing what we're seeing. And I asked him why. How do we then correct it? Maybe you'd answer that. He said to me, voter education.
No, you see, the point is that there's what we call, dissonance and negative or positive reinforcement. Somebody come and tell you, oh, vote is great. You have to be an ID citizen, civic citizen, be a Plato in anthems. But the point is, everyday reality convinces you that it doesn't make sense. See, this is the problem. People lack confidence. People are not getting involved in the politics of the society because they're helpless and hopeless. They don't see if they see the result at the end. So if we get one election cycle right, and people see the people who emerge are people they think ought to win, and those people deliver minimum, at least some above average performance, you will see a reigniting of civic consciousness.
All right.
So it's at the lowest level because people are saying two things happening. Failure in governance. People are not feeling the impact of democracy.
All right.
And secondly, they are also getting a messaging of helplessness, hopelessness, and brutality and coercion.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi, Director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought, for your contributions on Newsnight.
Thank you.
All right.